George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
7 people have just been mowed down and killed outside a homeless stroke migrant center in Texas. The biggest mass killing in Texas since yesterday, when a crazed gunman with an automatic rifle went berserk in a mall. That was the worst shooting since, well, you get the picture. But the question is, should we now ban SUV cars? Because that was the weapon that murdered all these people just moments ago. And it's Victory Day, or will be on the 9th, the victory of the Red Army in Berlin over fascism, crushing the beast of Berlin, Adolf Hitler, and his remaining zealots under the rubble of the Reichstag and the Führer bunker, both of which I visited over the last few days. We'll be talking about the meaning of that, not only historically, but contemporaneously. And we'll be talking about the coronation. And though I was thousands of miles away and mercifully did not see it, I do have rather a lot to say about it, and much, much more besides. Top guests, top calls, top tweets, everything is top here on this global university of the airwaves. So fasten your seatbelts. As Betty Davis once said, it's going to be a bumpy night.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
We're running a poll. Should the US Second Amendment on the right to bear arms be repealed? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter, on YouTube, on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, or on the YouTube community poll. Many thousands have already voted, and the result is not perhaps what you would imagine, given the regular, certainly weekly, oftentimes daily toll of mass murder that takes place in the United States. The question of banning weapons is otiose, in my opinion. It cannot be done. There are more illegal weapons in the United States than there are legal, and there are 100 million legal arms, maybe more than that. That statistic may be out of date. So disarming Americans is practically impossible in any case. I've got to tell you, if I was voting in this poll, I'd be voting no. If I lived in a country like the United States, as violent, as dysfunctional, as quite frankly horrific, divided across multiple axes from top to bottom, with a tyrannical government, with a tyrannical bipartisan Congress, I wouldn't give up my weapon either. But you can have your say. You can call the show even if you want to speak volubly about that. Of course, there was plenty of weapons around in 1945 on this day, and indeed on the preceding ones. The Red Army lost hundreds of thousands of casualties just in the battle for Berlin itself, but they were determined not just to crush Nazi Germany, not just to secure its capitulation, but to secure its entire destruction, because that fascist tyranny had visited almost 100 million casualties on the world. Unconditional surrender and the capture or killing of the Nazi hierarchy was the minimum requirement for the invading Red Army. I'm reading the epic work, I wish I'd brought it to show you, of my late and great friend and former parliamentary colleague Alan Clark, simply titled Barbarossa. Alan used to quite effortlessly turn out these epic works of extraordinary scholarship, which shone a light onto conflict so bright that you could almost see the blood seeping into the frozen ground. In the case of Barbarossa, he wrote another great book called Donkeys, about the lions that were led by donkeys in the trenches of the First World War. I commend both to you. But because I'm reading it, and because I have just been in Germany, I am acutely conscious of the significance of these few days in May. You'll recall the epic picture of the banner of victory being draped over the destroyed Reichstag. I visited it, nowadays called the Bundestag, just a day or two ago. Just 2 blocks from there, Hitler was still alive. His Hitler Youth and his most extreme SS zealots were holding out, still fighting, gun to gun, knife to knife, teeth to teeth with the invading Russian army. This regime, which had cost the lives of 26 million Russian people, 20 million Chinese people through its alliance with Japanese fascism, the people who died in Africa from the forces of Italian fascism. This axis of evil had to be crushed, but nobody could crush it except the Red Army. The Russians were the only people who could have destroyed this bestial tyranny and dictatorship. And just think about this. It is therefore the case that if not for the Russians, the entire world might still be under the jackboot of fascism. Just think about that. Of course, no Jew would be left alive in the world, probably no Slav either, no disabled person, no homosexual person, no communist, no socialist, no trade unionist, no dissident would have been permitted to live outside the concentration camps, maybe even outside the gas chamber. That's an unrepayable, irredeemable debt that humanity owes to the Russian people. And yet how quickly it was all forgotten. How quickly Western media and propaganda fixed the Russians who saved us from fascism, fixed them as the next enemy. And how many decades, all the decades of my young life, in fact, until 1990, it was an anti-Soviet demon against which we were ranged. Since 1990, despite the brief interregnum of Russia lying drunk on the floor and having its pockets picked by globalized capitalism and the buzzards, the vultures, who sought to feast upon its great national treasures, both industrial and mineral, that brief interregnum was ended on this day 23 years ago, when Vladimir Putin became the president of Russia for the first time. They hate Vladimir Putin in the way that they did not hate the drunkard Boris Yeltsin. And the reason, if you think about it, is obvious. Unfortunately, far too many people never think about it. Because Putin lifted Russia off the floor, dried it out, dusted it down, put it back on its feet, put it back to work, banned the vodka, restricted the drunken stupor into which so many Russians had fallen at the end of the communist period and in that aforementioned interregnum, rebuilt its strength, rebuilt its international prestige, so that all roads lead to Moscow now, including the roads from Beijing, the world's greatest industrial power, soon to be the world's greatest economy. Russia is now at the heart of the world island, the Eurasian heartland, which is carrying already all before it in economic, military, and political developments. That's why they hate Vladimir Putin. That's why they invent propaganda stories about him, as outlandish as the bayoneting of babies and the Belgian nuns in the propaganda of the First World War, as untrue as the Viagra given out by Gaddafi to Libyan forces so that they could rape women using rape as a weapon of war, as fictitious as the Iraqis unplugging babies from incubators in the hospitals of Kuwait and carrying the incubators back home to Iraq. A litany of more than a century of lying has been the hallmark of Western media in its servile service to the war machine, to the dictates of the big powers in our countries. That's why they tell you Putin's had a heart attack, a brain hemorrhage, why he's got cancer in every available organ, why he's got a body double, why he might be even dead. That's why they tell you that, because they hate him and they fear him. They hate him because he has put Russia back where it belongs as a great European and Asiatic society, and because they realize that he is winning. We'll be talking more. I've got a short film to show you about my time in Berlin. We'll talk more about that later. I want to turn to the coronation that took place in London yesterday. Now look, I'm in second place to nobody when it comes to acknowledging the brilliance of the British in these great state occasions. Few, if any, can match our taste for the big day. Few can match the resplendence of our surroundings, the cityscape of our capital city, at least in a square mile or so around Westminster, Buckingham Palace, the Mall, and so on. I'm one of the very few people on the left that enjoys the Edinburgh military tattoo. I like pomp and circumstance, even if I don't like the cause to which it is devoted. So I have no wish to rain on the King's Parade that took place yesterday. I have no wish to laugh at the millions of my compatriots who thoroughly enjoyed the day, those that were there and those that watched on television. I understand their feelings, and heaven knows it has been a long time since we have had anything at all to feel happy about as a country, as a people. But I cannot forswear to comment on the venality of the individual for whom all this was yesterday done. The venality of this adulterous tax dodger, this man who almost literally drove Princess Diana to her death in a Paris underpass. This man who conducted an illicit affair not only throughout his own marriage, but also through her own marriage, are now the King and Queen of Britain. And most particularly for the purposes of this monologue, he is the head of the Church of England. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a religious war, limited though my admiration for the Church of England is. I'm not going to turn this into a diatribe against a church founded on the balls of Henry VIII to facilitate his adultery. I'm not going to talk about the Church of England, the Anglican Communion with the swinging women vicars and the silk knickers on many a priest. I'm not going to talk about any of that. But I'm bound to make reference to an extraordinary thing that happened to me this afternoon. I caught out one of those swinging priests, Father Calvin Robinson, something of a figure on GB News, something of a figure on Twitter. I had long followed him, quite often agreed with him, regularly retweeted him. But I caught him out on that most ancient of vices, hypocrisy, and drew attention to it in a sharp, crisp rejoinder. Robinson then made a very big mistake of accusing me of a lack of erudition. Now, I may not have your fancy, expensive education, Father, but I am not lacking in erudition, and there are not many people who will watch this who will be in any doubt about that. You couldn't stand the heat, Father, so you blocked me on Twitter and then accused me of mocking God. Me mocking God. Nobody in the entire United Kingdom speaks about God to more people almost every week than me, and I certainly include your minuscule audience. I wasn't mocking God, Father. I was mocking you. Robinson, in terms, to please the GB News crowd and the anti-globalist people to whom he's normally preaching, of accusing the now King Charles anointed of being a scoundrel. And that had the benefit of being true. Father Robinson drew attention to his unsavory friends, and that is also undeniably true, from Jimmy Savile to Klaus Schwab and every other Istandism, every other faddist, every other net zero denizen, every other climate change hoaxer, every other compulsory vaxxer, and all the rest. That is indeed King Charles. And Father Robinson opened with that. But he went on in the same tweet to say, "But long may he reign over us. We don't get," he said, "to pick our kings," which is, of course, precisely the point. Actually, we're lucky because it could well have been King Andrew anointed by a two-girl Thai massage yesterday in Westminster Abbey. We don't get to pick our kings, so implicitly to God, Father Robinson said that he wished that God would allow, facilitate this man he'd just denounced as a scoundrel to rule over us for long. That's called hypocrisy, you see. It's called trying to ride two horses at the same time. If the first part is true, the second part cannot be true. And as for the later, once I'd been blocked, allegation that I was mocking God, let me make this point to you, Father Robinson. Jesus would have laughed at your lack of intellectuality, your lack of logic, your lack of theology, because people who believe in God don't just have a right to reject unjust kings, they have a duty, a responsibility to reject unjust kings, kings who will visit misery upon their people. And the only way to do that is to declare solemnly that this man is an illegitimate king. He's illegitimate on multiple levels that I don't have time to adumbrate. He's illegitimate because there is no commandment he has not regularly broken, with not a cent of penitence about it. He's illegitimate because he does not wish the best for those that he rules over, whether short or long. He is illegitimate because of his personal conduct. He is illegitimate as the head of a church, even one formed on the balls of Henry VIII. There is much more I could say, but I note that I'm running out of time. And so I wish only to return to the first words that I spoke. In the United States of America, for whom my heart bleeds, the great people of America are in the midst of a social, societal, cultural collapse. The 7 people who were murdered just before I came on air in Texas followed 8 people who were murdered there yesterday by a gunman with an automatic weapon. No day goes by without mass, internal, civil violence amongst the Americans. No neighborhood, no street, sometimes no tenement block, maybe even no house is free from the multiple vices that afflict American society. I genuinely mean my heart goes out to them. I have no wish to see the American people suffer. I wish with all my heart that the people of America can fix their society. But what I will never accept or even understand is how people who live in societies that are not, yet at least, like that, wants, begs this country of the United States of America to be their leader, to be their father, to give them orders, which they then faithfully carry out, even if those orders are so self-harming that no one can walk in any capital city in Europe today. And I've been in multiple capital cities in Europe over these last few weeks. They're all falling. Paris is falling. London has fallen. Berlin has fallen. These societies are rapidly going to the dogs in order to carry out aggressive military, economic, and political warfare against the 2 most successful countries and societies in the world today. As the Americans would say, go figure. Go figure indeed. Fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Okay, if you want to comment on anything I've said or didn't say, should have said, then you can call if you're in the UK and Ireland, entirely free of charge on 0808 196 5522. That's 0808 196 5522. And if you're in the US or Canada, again, toll free, +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, which, let's face it, most of you are, it's 44-203-966-2625. My favorite scholar, a man who could never be accused of a lack of erudition, is Professor George Szamuely, author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's humanitarian war on Yugoslavia, who joins me now from Hungary. Dr. George, welcome back to the show. Can I begin with the rather extraordinary story yesterday? Yet another journalist, writer, was blown up by the Ukrainian security services. Gonzalo Lira, frequent contributor to the show, was taken at gunpoint. Another journalist now behind bars, if not worse, at the hands of the Ukrainian security. One might put these things down to rogue elements, except Budanov, the head of Ukrainian security, was very clear with us in a statement that he made today. He said they were going to kill Russians and their propagandists anywhere in the world. In other words, placing the world on notice that a wave of international terrorism is on its way to them. Of course, if people are lucky, it will only be the Russian propagandist who's blown up. But if they're unlucky, well, it could be any of us who is blown up. This a sign of strength or a sign of weakness? A harbinger of things to come, or just the death throes of the Kyiv regime?
I think it's a sign of a terrorist regime. This regime that is in power in Kyiv, it came to power via an illegal coup. It has conducted itself entirely by violence, by terrorism, directed at civilians in the Donbass. And it's now continuing in the same manner, now targeting civilians. We've already had Daria Dugina, a young woman, murdered. We had a blogger murdered in a St. Petersburg cafe, and now an attempt on the life of a writer. But Russia really has to accept that this is not a war. This is not special military operations. This isn't a war about the Donbass. It is a war directed at that regime in Kyiv. And it has to think in terms of how would the United States have acted if there were such a terrorist regime in Mexico City that came to power via an illegal coup that was being armed to the teeth by Russia or China and was continually spewing hatred against the United States. Well, we know the answer. The United States would have invaded Mexico a long time ago. It would have gone straight into Mexico City. It would have kidnapped the president, would have taken him to the United States, imprisoned him in a federal penitentiary, and then he would have put him on trial in due course for war crimes, crimes against humanity, for terrorism, and so on. This is clearly what Russia needs to do. It needs to draw up a bill of indictment against Zelensky, his immediate advisors, against Poroshenko, who was in power after 2014. And do the same thing. I mean, this is a regime change operation. That's the only way this war can come to an end. Fighting it out in Bakhmut and going trench by trench, that doesn't really cut it. It has to be directed at that terrorist regime in Kyiv.
Russia certainly showed a great deal of forbearance. In former times, that forbearance would definitely not have been shown. As someone, as I said in my introduction, who was exactly where the rubble was in the Führer bunker, now a car park, I know for sure that the kind of things that are happening now would never have been tolerated. The bulldozing of Soviet Red Army war graves, for example. Indeed, the desecration in Germany yesterday of 400 Red Army graves, war graves. These are acts of war. The Polish example, this is an act of war. And there have been many, many such examples. And Donetsk is still being bombed, and civilians are still being killed there. Children in the Alley of Angels are still being murdered there. Why is Russia showing such forbearance?
Well, I think the problem is that Russia seems, unfortunately, too keen on winning arguments. Somehow showing themselves to be the better party, almost like, Jesus Christ, turning the other cheek. They don't seem to realize it doesn't matter if you win an argument. It doesn't matter if you point to American hypocrisy or American double standards, or that NATO lied here and NATO lied there. It doesn't matter. They know they're lying. The only thing that they will understand, what they say about Russia, they understand the language of force. That's the only thing that NATO understands. And I think, Russians often criticize the Soviet Union, and there are things to criticize. There was the Great Terror, collectivization, and so on. But there was one thing that you have to admire about the Soviet Union: you didn't mess with them. They didn't joke around, and they inspired terror. People were frightened of messing with the Soviet Union. Russia, unfortunately, now is in a position where countries aren't frightened of it. You listed the various things that these tiny Baltic states do, that they desecrate wartime monuments, cemeteries. You have Poland seizing diplomatic buildings, all without any repercussions. And that's the difference. I mean, with the Soviet Union, you didn't do that. You knew there would be repercussions. And unfortunately, Russians still just want to win arguments and think that somehow it's all going to sort itself out. No, the only way that you're going to change anything is by winning this war in Ukraine and doing it in as expeditious a manner as possible.
Well, as my good friend Robert Wyatt put it in a wonderful song, Stalin wasn't Stalin when he crushed the beast of Berlin. And I think it was Medvedev who said a week or so ago that those Germans who wish the invasion of Russia should be prepared for our victory parade in Berlin. But I've got to say, German public opinion, we'll see, but German public opinion seems resolutely set on a course of confrontation, even though they're being told by their own government not to shower every day. Imagine a German not showering every day, the cleanest people on the earth until a year and a bit ago. The Russian decision that will soon at least have to be made is whether it's bloodier to go on or to go, or whether steeped in blood so far, is it bloodier to go on or to go or, as the Scottish play put it. We've mentioned Stalin, who famously said that quantity is a quality, and the Russians don't lack quantity, neither quantity of space nor quantity of people. They mobilized hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Have they even arrived at the front? Are they being felt? What do you think the game plan is?
Well, it's very hard to know, because I think, as you said, with Stalin, that's the law of military science. It's quantities that win. You need to throw in masses of manpower, masses of infantry, masses of firepower. That's how you win wars. And unfortunately, Russia did not commit the necessary manpower and firepower to win this. I don't know what the Russians were thinking. Maybe they thought that there'd be some sort of a coup in Kyiv that would remove Zelensky. Maybe they thought that Zelensky would cave very quickly, like Dubček caved in 1968. It didn't happen. And it doesn't look like Russia at the moment has a plan B. What they're doing now in the Donbass just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense strategically. It doesn't really make sense morally. It's contrary to their objectives. I mean, their objective is, this is denazification. We have to crush the Nazi regime. Not, we don't have a problem with the Ukrainian people. It's the Nazi regime. But at the moment, the Nazi regime is doing very nicely. It's Ukrainian people and Russian people, of course, who are dying in Bakhmut. And that's because, it's very hard to make any progress in the Donbass. I mean, NATO has heavily fortified it. They got trenches, they got mines. They've been waiting for 8 years for this war. So it doesn't make sense to go on fighting there. What makes sense is to go for Kiev, to crush this regime, as I say, arrest Zelensky, put him on trial. That's the way you win this war. The initial plan, if it was that they could overthrow Zelensky by a coup and there wouldn't be any heavy fighting, that hasn't worked. So they need to, basically move to plan B. And it's the problem is that regime. It's not the Ukrainian people.
Now, what about the points I made earlier, George, Dr. George? It's evident a walk in the capital cities of European countries now makes plain at a glance. Just look around you at how we have fallen. And this in the service of a senile American president presiding over a country which could scarcely be more dysfunctional. Europeans, you're in one now, in the great capitals of Europe. Europeans are an ancient civilizational force with very high levels of very good quality education and so on. How did it come to this?
Well, I think that we have throughout Europe a kind of bought and paid for elite. These are people who have been brought along through American money, through the patronage of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, through the patronage of the likes of George Soros. So it's the elite that has emerged in Europe. It's not in any sense representative of the European peoples. They're bought and paid for. They punch their ticket as they're prime minister of this, foreign minister of that, and then afterwards they go on to some big bureaucratic job, making a lot of money, and then maybe getting a cushy professorship somewhere in the United States. So this is a completely artificial elite, and unfortunately, also Europe has been completely swamped by American culture. There isn't really any kind of a European culture anymore. It's all just offshoots of America. And you watch any kind of European TV shows, it's all just replicas of what they do in America. The Europeans embrace every American fad. You know, they embrace George Floyd and taking the knee, Black Lives Matter. They've embraced transgenderism. Anything that the Americans come up with, the Europeans just mindlessly mimic. And of course, now you have this politically, and they're destroying their own economies, destroying themselves as any kind of economic force for coming generations. And for what? But that's it. This is part of this sort of groupthink orchestrated by the United States, where there were once European leaders who stood up to the United States, whether it was de Gaulle in the 60s, Willy Brandt in the 70s, even Helmut Kohl to a certain extent in the 1980s. They've gone. They're not there anymore. It's just one kind of meaningless creature, like the Finn chick who was there, and they're interchangeable. None of them really represents any kind of a constituency.
I stood outside Willy Brandt House, the headquarters of the SPD in Berlin, just 48 hours ago, George, and I got to thinking quite a bit about him. In retrospect, a greater, taller man in world affairs than I had perhaps thought at the time. One thing is for sure, from Brandt to Schulz is a long way down. From de Gaulle to Macron is a long way down. Even from Thatcher to Sunak is a long way down, though I didn't have much time for Thatcher. We could go across the horizon in Europe. You're a political scientist of great note. What's the reason for the decline of our political class? Why did it shrink so?
I think they lost any connection with their electorates. I think they pursued agendas that were set by others, whether set by the World Economic Forum, by George Soros, above all by the United States. That's what they really cared about. You've made an excellent movie about Tony Blair. He's really the model of the new politician, the killing of Tony Blair. In other words, you do that, you punch your ticket as prime minister, and then you go on to make a huge amount of money serving all kinds of paymasters. That's the European political model today. So when you do your bit in the cabinet and in foreign ministries, that's just preliminary to your real task, which is to make a ton of money. And so that's what Europe is. Europe is now. It doesn't exist in Asia. There isn't a European culture. There's no European civilization. It's just an appendage of the United States. That's what was so really disgraceful about yesterday's coronation, because of course it was magnificent. And there was, it's a root, 1,000-year history. There was an amazing thing that they were celebrating, and yet the United Kingdom is just simply does the bidding of Washington. I mean, there's nothing here that just has any relevance to this ancient, magnificent tradition that was being celebrated, because in reality, all of those Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer and the rest of them who were sitting there, they don't represent any kind of an ancient Britain. They represent a political elite that does the bidding of Washington, and whatever Washington will say to them, they will do, irrespective of any national interests of the British people.
Dr. George, always a pleasure, a privilege, in fact, to hear you speak. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Should the US Second Amendment on the right to bear arms be repealed? A, yes, B, no. I'm afraid to tell you, no is winning out the park. You better get voting if you think otherwise. Let me take a short break and then a 2 or 3 minute video on Berlin.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Do support me on Patreon if you can, for the price of a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe per week, £1 per week, and you can support my independent media work. It's patreon.com/George Galloway. There's some new material actually going up this evening on that. Let me introduce you to a very short video of mine, shot by my good wife Gayatri, and, well, starring Berlin. Behind me is the Reichstag, nowadays the Bundestag, from which the banner of victory of the Soviet Red Army on that most glorious of Mays in 1945 was hanged. Just a few blocks away, Adolf Hitler in his bunker was getting ready to kill himself, but the regime of the Nazis, of Hitler fascism, was already dead. Underneath the rubble that had been the result of the greatest military triumph in all human history, the turning point of Stalingrad, the Battle of Kursk, the battle all the way to Berlin, and the battle inside Berlin, which cost hundreds of thousands of Russian lives. But finally, the German people were liberated and the whole world freed of the scourge of fascism, at least for a time. It is worth reflecting, you know, that if not for that Red Army victory, and don't forget that 8 out of 10 of all German casualties in the Second World War were inflicted by the Soviet Red Army and, of course, the partisans behind the lines. If not for that victory, the whole world might still today be under the jackboot of fascism. Hitler fascism, Italian fascism, Japanese fascism. In other words, the Russian people saved the human race. Their sacrifice of 26 million people, which reached its apogee here at the Reichstag, was the reason why you are free, at least a little bit free, today, to speak your mind, to listen to alternative points of view, to read books that would otherwise have been burned. And of course, if not for the Russian people, the Soviet Red Army, there would be no Jew left alive in the world. There might be no Slav person left alive in the world, no Romani, no Sinti, no disabled person, no homosexual person. Any Untermenschen would have been eliminated, physically annihilated in pursuit of the racial purity, which was the dream of Hitler fascism. Just think about that. I'm stating unequivocally that the Russian people and their Red Army saved all of humanity. It's passing strange then that we're supposed to love Germans and hate Russians nowadays. That a Russian tennis player cannot play. A Russian racing driver cannot get behind the wheel. A Russian citizen cannot get on an aeroplane. We can't play the music of long dead Russian composers. History is being rewritten. Not just the history of the Second World War, but the history of Russia itself. Many people came here and from here tried to invade and conquer Russia. Russia was invaded across the territory now known as Ukraine many, many times, but they all were defeated. Napoleon was defeated. Hitler was defeated. NATO will be defeated. These are the fundamentals that everyone living in the countries that we now call the West has to familiarize himself with. Because when history is being rewritten, when books are being burned, ignorance is the result. And everyone must seek out the truth. And that's what we at Moats, at the mother of all talk shows, try to be, that global university of the airwaves, allowing another point of view to be heard, showcasing people who would never get on the television anywhere else. Question more, discuss more, freely debate more. That's what we believe in. Let 1,000 flowers bloom and let the people pick the most fragrant. I visited the site of the book burning itself, foretold more than 100 years before by Heinrich Heine, who famously said, "Those who will burn books will later burn humanity." How's that for farsightedness? I visited that place, and on Wednesday we'll show you a short video from there, because it was on the 10th of May, 1933, exactly 90 years ago, that horrific harbinger of what was to come was shown to the world. The poll, should US Second Amendment on the right to bear arms be repealed? On Twitter, 1,630 people have voted. Yes, 37%. No, 63%. On YouTube, where 1,600 people have voted, yes, 37%. No, 63%, exactly the same result. On Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. Yes, 37. No, 63. Again, exactly the same result. And on the YouTube community poll, yes, 31. No, 69. And 7,000 people have voted on that particular portal. You can vote right up until the end of the show. Let's get some calls in. Mike in South Carolina, always a pleasure to argue with him. He's calling on the right to bear arms. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George, it's great to talk to you again. I haven't talked to you in a long time, but it's not for lack of trying. A lot of the times my calls were, redirected away from you, I think, by, the deep state.
No, we have hundreds of calls now, Mike, so it just might mean you couldn't get on.
I know it's
anyway,
working
go
now.
ahead.
It's working now, and I'm talking to you. But just a quick thing on the coronation before we talk about the Second Amendment. I know a lot of people here that watched the coronation yesterday. A lot of them cheering it on and stuff, but that I don't understand. But it's strange to me that Great Britain can entertain the thoughts of the individual state countries of Britain actually leaving Great Britain, like Scotland, Ireland, others. But they still entertain this idea of a king. I don't understand how somebody nothing but bloodline determines. I mean, regardless of how ignorant they may or may not be. Look,
Mike, there's nothing contrary to what some fools might say. There's nothing divine about this bloodline. This bloodline came to rule as a result of murder and mayhem and treachery and child killing. The princes in the tower and all of that, the beheading of wives and every kind of skullduggery you can imagine. That's what put this particular family on the throne. So there is no divine right to be the king. They just had the bigger swords, the more devious minds. But even if they were, as I put it, paragons of virtue and brilliance, I would still be against the idea of having an hereditary head of state. It's an infantilization, I believe, of the country. But we are where we are. To answer your point, Mike, there's millions of people in Britain do not support this king. In fact, as I said, I think last Sunday, there's now a critical mass of people against him in particular, against the monarchy though in general. And that divides along political lines, across political lines, left and right. It divides across the constituent parts of the United Kingdom. Scotland in particular would have, I think, a pretty low level of love for King Charles. I don't know about Wales. I don't know enough about it. But it would be a mistake to think that everyone in this sceptered isle is cheering on King Charles, especially once they've seen the Sky News video of him stuck in traffic with his carriage and the lip reader getting to work on his grumpy discourse. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I do agree with you about all that. And, it's just, the thing is, the media makes such a big deal out of it that it actually, molds people's opinions and consent, to be governed like this. But let's talk about the Second Amendment here in the United States. I answered your question, your poll question. But the thing is, and you seem to do this a lot. You need better people designing those polls because you don't have enough answers, enough possibilities in these polls. Like for instance, if you just ask, should you eliminate the Second Amendment? Well, the answer is no. Should we have serious gun control in the United States? Yeah, well, the answer is absolutely yes. That's why 30-something% say yeah, get rid of it, and 60-something% say no. But the real deal is how you actually implement this. I mean, the Second Amendment is not a bad thing, and here in America, it's a good idea to be able to have some arms just in case, but the amount and types of weaponry, could certainly be adjusted. You know what I'm saying? This has nothing to do with what the original Second Amendment was about. Nothing. Just as a for instance, should people be able to have a nuclear weapon I mean, that's armed, right? No, I mean, I think any reasonable person would say no. You probably shouldn't even be able to have mortars and bombs and whatnot. But that's not the question. You know what I'm saying?
Well, very well argued, Mike. We are constrained by the technology as to how many options we can offer, but you made your point very powerfully, as always. Thanks for making it. Marcus is in Chorley in England on the coronation. How was it for you, Marcus?
Depressing. 9,000 troops got brought in. 9,000 troops got brought in to march around for King Charles. In 10 years' time, how many of them are going to be sleeping in doorways in cardboard boxes? And nobody will give a thing.
I know what you mean.
Them.
Yeah.
But on the Second Amendment, as regards your first caller, they are just about on the verge of going into a purge. Because when the banks, when they just let them collapse, because that's what's happening every week, you see another American bank collapse. And what happens there happens here. We are going into some really dark area. Really, really dark.
Yes, we are. I agree. That's why I'm thousands of miles away. I agree with that. I'm very sorry to say we are headed into a dark place, not just in Britain, but in Europe as a whole. One or two shafts of light, France perhaps, but we are umbilically connected, willingly, to the United States, and very dark things are on their way down the pipe in the United States. The bank collapses are just one of the clouds, much bigger than a man's hand, but clouds nonetheless. But they are a harbinger of a very great storm to come in the United States. Again, some shafts of light. The presidential campaign of RFK Jr. is a real eye-opener, a real showstopper. If it were to catch fire, then it might be transformative, and we must do all we can to try and help that. We must pray for the safety of RFK Jr. But return of Joe Biden and his gangsters to power will undoubtedly take the United States over the cliff. Marcus, thanks for that call. Paul is in England, in Bournemouth, and wants to talk about Russia. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, George. Thanks for allowing me on your show, and I really like your show. Yeah, so I think the big deal with what's going on right now is that all wars have always been about resources, and the big market economies right now are essentially the EU, China, and US. And the US doesn't have enough resources, and China doesn't have enough resources. Both of them want Russia. So the only way the US get resources is they attack and take them. The Americans, they attack and take them. China, on the other hand, will do a commercial deal with you, like they're doing with Africa. So this war that's going on in Ukraine, it's really a proxy NATO war, and the aim is to degrade Russia to the point that NATO and the US thinks that it can defeat it and absorb all its resources, because it really needs them. Now, I think the Europe is deluded or misguided in this. They should take the view that they always have. They should be doing business independently with Russia, which they had been doing. Countries like the Netherlands and Germany have been doing good business with Russia for the past 30, 50 years. And that has been totally interrupted by the Americans through their involvement with NATO, but also if you look at the EU right now, it's becoming contaminated with NATO. Von der Leyen sounds more like a NATO leader than she does a EU leader at times. So where does this all go? NATO, EU.
Well,
Russia.
that is the the €64,000 question. We'll discuss it in the second hour, but the situation you described absolutely accurately and eloquently, so thanks for doing it. We do have a situation where the leaders of the European countries are leading their people to disaster, their societies, their countries even, to destruction. And it isn't just, of course, Russia and China. It's Russia and China and India and Iran and Brazil and South Africa, indeed almost all of the African continent. And it's now the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, is now throwing its lot in with the new Eurasian heartland. If, as seems likely now, Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS, as they are already alongside the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where more than half of the people of the world belong, where more than half of the wealth of the world reposes, then it's game over. The de-dollarization, which is gathering pace in front of our eyes, you can see it every day, becoming a reality, is fatal, doomed for the United States. Sure, it's still got a printing press. It can still print its dollars, but based on what? Certainly not on natural resources, not on gold, and no longer increasingly on the petro dollar. It's the petro yuan that you need to get into now. Paul, thanks for that very erudite call. After the break, I have another scholar and gentleman. He's Tom McGregor. He's in Beijing in China to talk about all of these things and more. Stay tuned.
And it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary MacLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Sorry if you can't get through on the phone or onto the show at least. More than 150 people call the show every week, 0808 196 5522. We prioritize first-time callers. So if you are one of those, call now. You never know, you might get on the show. In the US, +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the rest of the world, 44203 966 2625. We prioritize first-time callers and women callers. If you're a first-time caller and a woman caller, you're almost certain to get on the show. My good friend Tom McGregor is an American in China. Well, there are a surprising number of his compatriots I discovered for myself when my good wife Gayatri and I recently spent time there, and indeed soon will again. Tom McGregor, though, is an outstanding figure. He's not a figure of the left in American politics. I don't think he'd mind me saying that. He's a conservative man, a Texan, who has come to know and love China and has become, I think, the best pundit in China. And that's something to be. Tom McGregor joins me now. Tom, thanks for being back on the show. My condolences to you as a Texan for the horrific events in your state over the last couple of days. 8 shot dead yesterday in a mall. 7 mown down and killed outside a homeless shelter elsewhere in Texas this evening. So my condolences on that. The US is in a bad way before we turn to China. This is not a good time to be telling everyone they should be like America.
That is very correct. America has long been on a decline in the past few years, perhaps probably for a decade or so. And what we're witnessing is an America in decline, while we are also seeing a China on the rise. So a lot of times when empires are on the decline, they are the last to know that they are the ones on the decline, because a long time they have gotten used to and accustomed to the fact that they can see themselves as an empire, and from that they just assume that they can make that last for a long time to come. But with this decline, what's really going on is they are becoming more angry and upset and trying to take more gambles to stay on top. And as such, there's a much higher likelihood that you will see much more bullying on the part of the Americans towards other countries, especially towards Europe.
China, of course, doesn't take bullying, as Deng Xiaoping said to the then Prince Charles. The days when China took orders from foreigners are long gone. And yet they're still always trying to give China orders. Only the other day, an American official, senior official, demanded that that China tell Russia to get out of Ukraine, all the while shuffling more and more weapons into Taiwan, where you yourself were visiting just last week. For the Chinese people and their leadership, how unkindly do they take it to be lectured by foreigners in this way?
Well, it's been long accustomed by many of the U.S. government to constantly lecture other countries on what they should do according to America's perspective of global governance. It's just been a long custom, and of course, obviously, the U.S. government side has often told China what to do, and China hears what is being said by the U.S. government, but doesn't exactly always follow what the U.S. government says. So let's say, for example, yes, I did visit Taiwan, and it was a very interesting experience for me. But what was interesting was I discovered a lot of differences in Taiwan than what I'm seeing in the international and Western media. What I often see in the international and Western media is this sensationalism and these claims that China is going to have an imminent invasion on Taiwan, and that war is soon going to happen. I mean, this is a constant theme that you'll see in the international media, especially in regards to Taiwan. But when I visited Taiwan, what really shocked me was the simple fact that most people are not worried about this sensationalism, that they were relatively calm, that they anticipate and believe that they can have peace with China. Okay, so with the U.S. sending weapons to Taiwan, this has always been the case, that they've always sent a lot of weapons. But if you take a closer look at the quality of those weapons that have been sent to Taiwan, they weren't exactly very good or high quality weapons. They weren't always a lot of times those weapons the U.S. sent weren't really working. A lot of times it's just a show to make it look like the U.S. is really helping Taiwan. But for those in the know, those who are experts know that a lot of those weapons being sent were not high quality, and often they were not even working. Okay, so a lot of this is just a show. In regards to telling China that they're asking Russia to get out of Ukraine, well, there's no surprise there. Well, it looks like Ukraine is losing, and that is different than what the Americans and the Western media have been claiming, which is Ukraine is winning. If they are begging for Russia to leave Ukraine and trying to get China to help to persuade Russia to leave Ukraine, to me, that shows Ukraine is losing, not winning.
What did the Taiwan people think about visits from Nancy Pelosi and a succession of grandees from the United States? Did they not see that as provocative behavior? on the US? After all, the easiest way to guarantee a Chinese recapture of the island is to persuade the Chinese that the Americans are going to make it impossible ever for Taiwan to return to the motherland.
Well, that's also a very interesting analysis and something we need to really explore that I had trouble understanding actually until I went to Taiwan and got to meet people there who live on the island their entire lives. And another surprise that I discovered when I was there was when I talked to many people in Taiwan and asked them about Pelosi's visit or Xi's visit to the US. I was expecting them to be a little bit excited, maybe emotional, because here the media claims that they really love the USA and they worship the USA. So, of course, they would love Pelosi to visit. But a lot of times when I asked people from Taiwan, what really surprised me was they were like, I don't care. No big deal. Who cares? It's just Pelosi. We weren't really excited when she came. We were more surprised by how the international media was talking about Pelosi's visit. And of course, obviously, China responded in a very strong way. And that definitely shocked many people from Taiwan. But the overall theme and consensus that I heard from many people in Taiwan was they really didn't pay closely attention to the Americans or even the US foreign policy. Pelosi came, and then suddenly there's all these reporters from all over the world showing up in Taipei, and then they're blowing it up like this is now going to create a war with China and Taiwan, when to them it was just another American showing up, trying to show off. And also when I asked people about Xi's visit to US, they were like, oh, it's just a transit visit. What's really more important is she went to Belize, and then she went to some of their South American friends. They actually thought that her visits to South America was more important than her visit to the United States.
Now, Taiwan is officially in recession, whilst Chinese growth is multiplying and going to be, I think, 4, if not 5 times greater than growth in the rest of the G7. I think 4 times greater than the United States. Taiwan is going in the opposite direction. And yet the US is bullying it in relation to its semiconductor industry. What does the US want Taiwan to do?
I'm not sure, to be honest, because the economy in Taiwan, as you said, is disastrous right now. They reported over 3.02% drop in its GDP in the first quarter of this year, and it was actually noticeable. Our team, we went down to Kaohsiung. This is the major port city of Taiwan. We were expecting to see this really bustling city that was robust, that was a really happening city, and it was nothing more than a ghost town. We even showed up in Kaohsiung main station, right next to where their international port is, and we couldn't find any shops that were open. A lot of places were shuttered. It was closed down. It was shocking to us because this is the major port city of Taiwan, and it's a dead zone. It was really disturbing. So what it shows to me is that the trade in Taiwan is getting shattered, destroyed, and it's a lot because of the U.S. foreign policy. They have put a lot of restrictions on trade with China. And so now Taiwan is in a very dangerous place economically. And their chips, who knows? Maybe the U.S. wants to control TSMC, which is a major manufacturer of semiconductors, because obviously they're not helping TSMC. It was really quite disturbing as well to me. I was hearing stories from people, like, for example, I've heard about Micron. They're doing major layoffs in Taiwan, in the Asia Pacific region. They're involved with the chips manufacturing. So what exactly does America want? Maybe they want to destroy Taiwan's high-tech sector, so then they can replace them and become and surpass Taiwan as a major high-tech and science manufacturer. But this will not lead to success. By sabotaging your own friends, that creates a lot of mistrust.
Now, speaking of happening cities, the last time we met was in the very happening city of Beijing. But the astonishing thing for me, and it had been 25 years since I had been in Beijing, was the wealth of the people. I was in a high street in which, I'm not exaggerating, 1 million people were there. There was a queue a mile long to get into every shop, just to get in to the shop, to spend the money that the people quite evidently had. There's even a Manchester United superstore on that street. And I spent a few shillings in there. This incredible burgeoning of China. People on the whole must be glad that they're in China. Why don't the Taiwan people see that? Are they kept from that knowledge? Do they know that while they're in recession, China is booming? How do you keep them down on the Taiwan farm when Paris is just across the straits?
Sure. Well, that's also a good question. I think basically what you have is a society in Taiwan. You have people there who've grown up in their society, and they have long been told that China is this terrible and evil country, and that if they try to draw closer and have closer relations with China, then their lives will be miserable, because then they'll be under the control of the Chinese government. So there is this constant prevailing sentiment that in Taiwan, no matter what happens, don't go politically closer to China. Now, they can have business deals, but they separate the business from their politics. So that being said, basically you have a media, you have schools, you have education, you have an entire system in place where the Taiwan people are basically informed and told that they must side with the US over China on everything related to political and diplomatic issues. So even though the Chinese economy is doing much stronger, they always end up looking at that with suspicion. But what I anticipate eventually is this economy in Taiwan really is crashing. And if they don't see it now, what I saw in Kaohsiung is going to happen all over the island if they really follow up on what the US is doing to them. And so by that being said, eventually, if there is a major downturn in the economy and many people lose jobs and many people go poor, they may soon discover that China is not as bad as they thought it was, and they may actually want to improve ties and improve trade, because that would make a better situation for them. So the fact is the society of Taiwan is strongly anti-China. It's been that way for many decades, and it just is, and you can't really change that mindset. But what could happen is if there's a major crash in the local economy, they may discover that it's the Chinese and not the Americans who rescue them.
I think it was Dr. Kissinger who said being an enemy of the United States can be dangerous. Being a friend of the United States can be fatal, as many have found out from the Shah of Persia through the leaders of Afghanistan, and who knows, one day soon, the leaders of Ukraine and Taiwan. Tom McGregor, as always, a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for getting up so early in the morning to be on the mother of all talk shows. So now 12,000 people have voted on the poll, and it's not looking good for the anti-gun lobby, which is on 38, 37, 37 and 31, whilst those who wish the Second Amendment to remain sacrosanct are on 62, 63, 63 and 69. Let me take a quick break, and I'll be right back with your calls. Stay tuned. A big thanks to the people who support me on the Patreon page. I really have come to depend on the income from that. It costs £1 a week, not even the price of a cup of coffee in an insalubrious cafe. If you think you could stretch to that, please support me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, the Moats team have added a tiered system on my Patreon page where you can become an official Moats graduate. How about that? I speak as someone who graduated from nowhere, from the factory floor in Michelin. But you can become a Moats graduate and legend. You can give a regular donation to support the show and my work. You can now upgrade from a mere Patreon to a Moats graduate at £10 a month, as opposed to £5 a month, I think it is. And you can receive official Moats legend status for £20.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A big and sincere thank you to my new patrons, James Halpin, Stephanie Caro, Michael Sherry, and Sereno. And messages from my patrons. Guess Again says, new member here in Alabama. My country has been taken over by idiots. Love the show, the truth, and your unique sense of humour. Best wishes on the continued success of the mother of all talk shows. Sincerely, John and Karen Guess. Thank you, John and Karen. James Lenehan, a year-long patron, says banks in the US keep going down, but one of the reasons may be surprising, or maybe not. Short sellers are shorting the stocks of financially stable banks, cashing in on people's fear of a major bank crash. The Financial Times reported that hedge funds have made $7 billion in the recent crisis. I recommend the newsletter Wall Street on Parade for more details. The world needs some giant hedge cutters. And Andy, another new patron, says, free Gonzalo Lira. On the Russian people saving of all humanity in 1945, history is written and cannot be rewritten, no matter how hard they try. And Monya Spurl says, George, please help putting pressure against the arrest of Gonzalo Lira. The case needs a lot of public attention, and you are an important and well-known voice in the world of truth and justice. And Graham Briggs-White, a Moats legend, Graham, thank you for that, says, on the poll, I would have said yes years ago, but corporations are too dangerous now. With all that has happened, were Radovan Karadzic and Slobodan Milosevic such war criminals after all? And someone, my grandson actually, Sean, says, gives me a picture of Bakhmut on fire 2 hours ago. I think they intend to finish the Bakhmut fight in time for Victory Day on Wednesday. Now, Ryan is on the line in Doha, in Qatar, on the Second Amendment. Go ahead, Ryan.
How you doing, George? Just first of all, congratulations on Celtic winning the league title today. I know you'll be a happy man.
Hail, hail. Hail, hail, and by a country mile.
By a country, but it's not even close anymore. It's embarrassing for the other side.
We need a British. We need a British Premiership, Ryan. It's the only answer to this. We can't keep having a one-horse race and sustain the interest.
Do you know what I mean? Seeing teams like Bournemouth in the Premier League, it don't take any fans. Imagine Celtic and Rangers in that league. They take about 10,000 everywhere.
Exactly. I've been fighting for that for 20 years. Anyway, go on. Yeah. We'll be boring the viewers.
Well, we will be. I just obviously, as a sort of fellow journalist, you kind of look back at the sort of fall of America over the last sort of decade, not in horror in a sense. This year so far, there have been 160 mass shootings already. And you're talking the start of May here. It's just unbelievable. And now, I know you were saying earlier that you wouldn't ban the Second Amendment. Now, I'm not for the Second Amendment, but I get your point that you raise in the sense of you'd be fearful of living in that country with the particular rates of crime, etc. But the right to bear arms now, obviously that was written by the founding fathers, etc. But it's metamorphosised into something now that is just beyond the realms of control of anyone. Like the idea that the Founding Fathers meant that someone in the street could own an AK-47 and go into a school or a synagogue or a public office or a federal building and just mass down everyone that they find was not what they meant. So we're at a sort of road here that obviously there's too much gun ownership in America for them to try and take the guns off everyone. It's just not going to happen. It's just never, ever going to happen. So the government sort of have a choice here.
Well, you've summed it up perfectly, that it is inconceivable that I think the last figure I saw was the 150 million gun owners in the United States are going to hand over their weapons. And even if they did, the millions of criminal elements who are armed to the teeth. And by the way, an AK-47 would be a blessing. We're talking about people with automatic rifles far more powerful than an AK-47. The one who murdered 8 people in a mall yesterday was equipped with a fearsome AR that was firing multiple rounds per second. These weapons are absolutely deadly. But what we're going to do about it, Ryan, how can anybody do anything about it? And if you were living there in all these circumstances, you would not give up your weapons. I wouldn't give up my weapons where I live, never mind in the United States.
That's very true. I mean, I've got family in California, for example, that are staunchly Democrats, so they're anti-Trump, like, to the max. But on the flip side of that, the crime rates in the areas that they live in, which is just outside San Francisco, have increased about 5 to 6-fold over the last 2 years or so. Now, they live in an area where there's a Walmart, obviously, like on every street corner. But it's got to the point now that if anyone goes into the stores and steals anything below the value of $800, the police aren't even phoned anymore. So they've actually had to legally obtain a weapon because they cannot take the risk of home invasion in what used to be a very, very safe neighbourhood. Now, they argue that, and they are my family members and I love them, but they're wrong in this, that like, Trump is the antichrist of everything that ever goes wrong in America. Now, I would argue that things were going wrong in America long before Donald Trump ever took the presidency. It's been going wrong for a very, very, very long time.
And long after he ceased to be the president, Donald Trump was a symptom of what was wrong with America, not the cause of what was wrong in America. And San Francisco, when I was first there, was a heavenly place, albeit very cold. As Mark Twain said, the coldest winter I ever experienced was summer in San Francisco. It was a heavenly place. I mean, older viewers will remember when it was the city of love, hippies, flowers in the hair and all that. It's now hell on earth in San Francisco. The United States is in a societal, cultural, economic and political crisis. And they displace their activity by making war with very big guns indeed overseas. But the reality is, if you live there, as your relatives do, and of course 300 million people do, you're not going to give up your weapons, because that will just make you even more unsafe than you already feel. Ryan, thanks for a great call from Doha. David is in Folkestone in England on the Ukraine. Go ahead, David.
Hello, George. First time caller.
Yes.
A long time visit.
Welcome.
Viewer.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm calling about your interview with George Szamuely and what he said. It's because for a long time I have been a viewer of Paul Craig Roberts. Do you know Paul Craig Roberts?
I do,
the
yes.
American. Well,
yes.
For years now, he has been saying in his blog that Putin has been doing this all wrong. He has sat back and watched what has been happening in Ukraine sneak up on him, and he couldn't figure out why he was doing this. And lo and behold, We saw what happened in the last
Yes.
since 2014.
Well,
2000,
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
obviously, Russian policy is the prerogative of the Russians, and I'm not there. I don't have insight into the mind of Putin. But the way I put it, and I have done so before, is if I was the leader of Russia, I would have done this in 2014 when the NATO penetration and arming of Ukraine would have been at a lesser pitch, when it would have been more obviously caused by the violent, illegal overthrow of the government, the president, and the parliament in Kyiv by a violent mob, openly coordinated by the European Union and the United States. I would have annexed the eastern part of Ukraine, where overwhelmingly the people are Russian-speaking people who look to Russia rather than look to the West. I would have done that in 2014. It may be that Russia did not feel able to do it. It may be that Russia was compromised by Western orientation that will never come back, but which was there until a year and a bit ago. They did not want to burn all their bridges with the West, as it's described, bridges which are now entirely burned and forever in any case, or in the case of the pipelines, blown up to smithereens. I don't know why the Russians did not do that at that time. I would have myself counseled them to do so, but they didn't, and we are where we are. And the question I asked George is in that Shakespeare quote I gave, steeped in blood so far, they have to ask themselves whether it's bloodier to go on or go back. And if it's not really possible to go back now. And so they must go on. And if they must go on, perhaps they must go on in a different way. That's the point that George was making, with which many people in Russia will concur. David, thanks. Excellent call for your first time. Don't be a stranger. Call back again. Kevin Broom has emailed the show at onair@moats.tv. George, is it true the West panicked when Stalin stormed across Europe and pleaded with him to stop at Germany? When he did, apparently, the West secreted Nazi scientists away to the US. If he had not stopped, the continent would be all Russia. Well, I don't think that Stalin or the Soviet Union had any intention of doing that. But I've got to say that the division of Germany along the Elbe, which led to the creation of East Germany and the GDR, should have been maintained. I opposed the reunification of Germany, something I had in common with Margaret Thatcher, who came up to me, in the only time in my life that she ever spoke personally to me, was to tell me that I had rather a lot of sympathy with that. And I did so for an obvious reason. I said so for an obvious reason. A united Germany had invaded France 3 times in 70 years. Had invaded and occupied France 3 times in 70 years. And so keeping Germany divided, personally, was my long-held political position, because I grew up in the shadow of the Second World War, and it shaped the world that we have today. Whether people are conscious of that now or not, I'm not entirely sure. But allowing the reunification of Germany, its remilitarization, indeed some people, to my astonishment, like Andrew Neil, openly proselytizing for bigger and more powerful German military forces and more German military spending, I always argued that we'll rue the day that the division of Germany was ended. But it was ended. But NATO made Gorbachev a promise in return for his agreeing to end it, that NATO would not advance 1 inch to the east, beyond Germany. That promise is attested to in the documents of the meetings. In James Baker's memoirs, there's a whole chapter on that promise. It is the comprehensive breaking of that promise that has put us in the state we're in. Nick Donovan sends $25 on the super chat. Much obliged. Nick says, the Church of England is truly the greatest embarrassment to people of faith, propping up an institution as laughable as the British monarchy, with its history of evil perpetrated against the poor and innocent of the world. Shame on them. Well, I did say, Nick, I wasn't going to give all guns blazing to the C of E, but the arch hypocrite of Canterbury, Mr. Welby, is a bridge too far. The straw that broke the camel's back. These swinging, trendy vicars and their arch hypocrite of Canterbury are somehow, for me, encapsulated in the conduct of one of their clergy, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, in his exchanges with me today. Doc Jazz sends 50 UAE currency. I'm always grateful, Doc, for your unremitting support. Keep up the great work on Moats. Europe owes Russia for having broken the very spine of the Nazi Empire in World War II. Instead, it colludes with the USA to try to destroy it. Mission impossible. Yeah, nobody has been able to destroy Russia. They are always defeated. I'll read some quotes on Wednesday from my friend Alan Clark's great book, Barbarossa. Rafael Legonda sends $4.99 US. Only one thing we all must admit, the king is the most educated king in history. No country at any time never had a king with an advanced degree. Is he really educated? I'm not myself educated, and I may be wrong. But if he is, he's the most educated fool in history. Glenn R. Johnson sends £10 All the best to you, George. I'm going to continue to support you as often as I can. God bless you, and I do hope your audience continues to grow. Your shows lately and the guests have been fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. God bless you. This comment from Bob Cosmic. George, you imitating Thatcher. Now I know the world is ending. Kevin is in Suffolk. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Kev.
Hello. Hello, George. Yeah, you
Hi.
sort of, you could have knocked me down with a feather when you brought up Alan Clark and Barbarossa, because I'm actually rereading that for the first time since the 80s. So that's like an amazing coincidence. And I'm rereading
it. This is the third time I've read it, Kevin, because it is such a monumental piece of work and so detailed that it repays reading and rereading and rereading.
Well, I agree. I mean, any great book does. You said you're going to read some quotes. I wanted to read something. I mean, this is the 1985 edition, and he put an author's note at the beginning. Otherwise, it's unchanged. But he said, obviously, amongst other things, I feel regret that the Soviet Union, whose heroism I have chronicled in this book, should still be relegated now, it seems in perpetuity, to the role of our ritual adversary. That the Russian people's qualities, their patience, their inventiveness, their romanticism should be excluded from the family of nations. And I just thought that was incredibly apt for the times we're going through at the moment.
Beautiful and contemporaneous, you're right. I, of course, like you, read that book in the 1980s. Then later I sat in Parliament with Alan Clark. We would regularly repair to an Indian restaurant nearby in Horseferry Road. Oftentimes just the two of us, sometimes joined by Robert Rhodes James, another Conservative MP and historian. And the conversation was even more marvellous than the curry. And one of Alan's characteristics was his absolute hatred of Hitlerism and fascism, and his absolute admiration for the Red Army and for the people of Russia, for its culture and so on. And thus I had fellow feeling with him, even though we were on different sides of the political fence. Although when he was the Minister for Defence Procurement, I did successfully persuade him to give all 5 of the Type 23 frigates on offer to my shipyard at Yarrows on the Clyde. Kevin, don't be a stranger. Come back on Wednesday when I've read some of my quotes. Why don't you? Should the US Second Amendment on the right to bear arms be repealed? Overwhelming now. The answer is no, and 13,000 people have voted. You've still got a few minutes that you can vote in. More super chats. Cooler King 74 sends $5. Hello from Kentucky. You're right about the Asian hate because my fiancé is Filipino and half Muslim. God bless your work and family. Thank you. And Phil McGrath sends £20. Thanks, Phil. Vladimir Lukic, €10. Thank you, Vladimir. Albert Sontag, a regular and good friend of the show, sends $10. Jeffrey Long sends Australian dollars $2.99. The real king of the airwaves. God bless you. Thank you, Jeffrey. I've only had 2 kings in my life. One was Dennis Law and the other was Eric Cantona. Although Henrik Larsson was a foreign king of mine. Charlie is in Dorset on the king. Go ahead, Charlie.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, turn your volume down, Charlie, on the TV or the computer that you're watching on. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Hello. Yeah. Hello.
Yes, Charlie,
hello.
You're on the air. But Charlie, you're on the air.
Right. If I'm on the air, what do we want to talk about? Our king, which is not my king because he does not deserve to be for all the monarchy he has done and the money. And if they are for the people, they should help the people, not spend the people's money to have a coronation.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Charlie, it's a very bad line, but a very good call. It's not that it cost £250 million, because you need to put on the other side of that balance sheet the boost to the economy, foreign visitors, and so on that it generated. So the net spent will probably be about the same amount as the amount spent on his mother, Queen Elizabeth's 1953 coronation. It's not that money I'm worried about. It's the king's ransom that the royal estates and the Duchy of Cornwall and the public purse that has made King Charles one of the richest men in the world, a multi-billionaire, on which he avoids paying almost all tax. This is unconscionable. The coronation itself, as Norman Baker said on Wednesday's show, was entirely unnecessary. He became the king on the instant of the last heartbeat of his late mother. He was already the king, so why a coronation? There are 9 surviving monarchies in Europe, and we are the only people to have a coronation. It was to manufacture consent for the continuation of this family of no great achievement and very great moral sickness, to continue. I believe it's a mistake. I think that King Charles has too many people who don't like him to leave behind him a net benefit for the monarchy. And I've gone through them before. The people who love Diana, the people that hate net zero, the people that hate all these fads that he has embraced all of his life, the people who believe that adulterers, persistent, unrepentant, decades-long adulterers should not be the head of state, at the very least, should not be the head of the official national church that he pledged again yesterday to ensure the supremacy of. I don't want that church to be supreme. I have my own church. It's not less valid than his. It's more valid than his. It is one. It is universal. It is holy, Roman, and Catholic. It is age-old and was not founded on the balls of Henry VIII. He is not fit to be the king because of his unsavory associations with Jimmy Savile in particular, but more latterly with Klaus Schwab and the people whose globalist agendas is beggaring and destroying the country that he pledged to serve yesterday. You can't serve Britain and Klaus Schwab at the same time. That's a contradiction in terms. It is moronic to imagine that King Charles is going to have our best intentions. It is an oxymoron, an oxymoronic. So there are many, many reasons, Charlie, why I'm opposed to this particular person. I didn't speak this way about the Queen, as long-standing viewers will know. But I always said that whilst overwhelmingly the British people respect the Queen, upon her demise, which comes to everyone, there should be a referendum on the continuation of the monarchy. And I strongly believe that now, and I believe the case for it will steadily mount with every grumpy day of the reign of King Charles III. Charlie, his namesake in Dorset, thanks for making that call. Eddie is in the US, in Kentucky, and is a new caller, and so is prioritized. Go ahead, Eddie.
Mr. Galloway, how are you today?
By the grace of God, good. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
I'm honored to talk to you. I didn't know who you were until recently, but I've been watching on a regular basis now, and that will continue. I'm a 73-year-old. I live in the great state of Kentucky, and as far as the Second Amendment goes, I mean, we could have a discussion that would last days, but we don't have that. So the biggest problem with the Second Amendment is the people who oppose the Second Amendment. You can't have a rational discussion with them. I've tried. You can't do it. They never give up. They always want more. And just as an aside, I was one of the few gun owners back in 1992 who supported the Brady Bill, which allowed for a waiting period. And at the time, the Democrats and other people said, just give us this. We need this. This will take care of it, and we won't ask for anything more. And the ink is no more dry on that until that damn Edward Kennedy started talking about more and more and more. Outlaw this, outlaw that. So the problem is, like so many other things in our society and others, you can't have a discussion with them. There just simply is no way to have a discussion. You know, I was told for years that you can't give them an inch because they'll take a mile, and that really is the truth. You know, I as a gun owner, I mean, I can walk right in my next room there, and I got mine in the gun case. One of them is from 1934. I shot when I was 6 years old. So I would be happy to have a rational discussion about guns, but I just don't see it happening, and I just don't. I don't know how you do it. I really don't.
Well, let's have one now, Eddie. I'm sympathetic to your position, as you already know. You can't ban SUVs because one of them was used as a weapon to murder 7 people. No doubt that number will grow in Texas right this evening, just minutes before the show went on air. It wasn't the SUV that killed the people, it was the driver, it was the people, the person who used it as a weapon of mass destruction. So on that, we are, I think, at one. I've already told you that if I was an American, it would be from my cold, dead hand that you would take my weapons, because I believe America to be a very frightening and scary place to live. And that wouldn't get less scary and frightening by you taking my weapons away. But there must be a case for people on mental health lists, patients, mentally ill people, people on medication for mental illness, super meds. There must be a case for them not being able to own and carry high-powered automatic weapons. Apparently, the man who murdered 8 people in Texas yesterday was one of such people. He was mentally ill and was being treated for mental illness. So joined up writing would tell you that once you become a mental patient, your right to own the weapon is taken away from you, at least temporarily. Eddie, what do you think?
Well, funny you should bring it up, George. My wife, she's sitting in the other room listening to this, but my wife is a psychiatric nurse, retired 30 years. She was a psychiatric nurse for 30 years. And you don't even want to get her started on the problems with the mental health thing. You are entirely correct, George. A mentally ill person, and make no mistake, these people are mentally ill. Anybody who would do anything like that is mentally ill. You might have a mean streak in them somewhere, but most of them are mentally ill, and they shouldn't have these weapons. And something else that's forgotten in all of these discussions, you know, I live in the great state of Kentucky, and we're famous for our firearms. And one thing that's never mentioned is gun owners like myself and my neighbors around here. Nobody knows any more about the effects of a firearm, the handling of a firearm, the safety of a firearm, and what a firearm can do than we do. The idea that someone would walk in a school with a AR-15, semi-automatic AR-15, I mean, my mind won't even go there, George. It just, you know, it didn't happen when I was in school, because if somebody tried it when I was in school, half the cars in the parking lot, including mine, had a hunting rifle in it, and most of the time the vehicle wasn't even locked. So, you know, as part of your broader discussion earlier and ongoing, you know, we are in a hell of a shape, not to mention the world's in a hell of a shape, but in our case, the United States of America, look who we got running the country right now. I mean, this guy, hell, you talk about a king, he acts like a king, if anybody ever did. And, you know, the open borders and the lack of civility, crime not being prosecuted, people shoplifting on something, I can't believe it even happens. You almost think it ain't even real when you watch it. So, you know, it's the whole thing, all of it is a broader discussion about our society has gotten so crude and so insensitive. And, you know, I hear people say a lot of times it's described as everything that used to be good is now bad, which I find to be true. So I really don't know how we get out of the mess we're in. And, you know, in talking about the war. Beautifully
expressed, Eddie. Yeah, beautifully expressed. Definitely the call of the night from Eddie in Kentucky. Give my regards to your good wife, please, Eddie, and don't be a stranger. Call anytime. Let's go to Joseph in London on China. Joseph, welcome.
Welcome. Welcome. Hi there, George. Yeah, I'm worried about Donald Trump and China. I think a lot of non-interventionists, they're secretly hoping that Donald Trump wins the next presidential election because I think it will mean less US wars, etc., etc. I think this is a real mistake. I think Donald Trump is going to provoke a war with China, and that this will make the war with Ukraine look like nothing. I mean, a war with China will be a world war. I think it's really desperately important that we don't support Donald Trump, that nobody supports Donald Trump, support anyone else. I'll tell you why.
What, including Joe Biden? Including Joe Biden, Joe?
At this moment in time, Donald Trump is a bigger threat than Biden. Okay, and I'll tell you why. And
I don't see how. No, hold on. I don't see how rationally you can possibly state that when Joe Biden is in power now, and we are on the doomsday clock, closer than we've ever been to World War III.
Because I think the war between Russia and Ukraine is a bit smaller than what's going to happen. Okay, the war will stay isolated between Russia and Ukraine. I think if Donald Trump comes in, he will provoke a war with China. Everything he's done, everything he's said leads me to that conclusion, and that will be a world war. I don't think Russia-Ukraine will turn into a world war. This one will. I'm not defending Biden. I'd never vote for him. I'm a socialist. How could I vote for Biden or support him? But he is much less of a threat at this moment in time than Donald Trump, I can assure you. I mean, put it this way.
All right, I've got to stop you. No, I've got to stop you, Joseph, only because of the hour. It was an excellent call. It was boisterously wrong, but I enjoyed arguing with you. It's just that it's almost the end of the show, and I have one more call that I must get in. My only piece of advice to you, Joseph, is don't bet your house on that. Please. Now, we have a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol, without whom no show is complete. The lovely Norma, now loved throughout the world as the legend of the mother of all talk shows. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I just wanted to make a couple of points about the coronation. Earlier, you delivered the explanation about why Charles is not morally fit to be the king. And you did refer to his riches just now, but I was having a chat with my grandchildren this afternoon, and we were talking about, I said there are many exemptions that the king doesn't have to pay, hereditary tax in the royal family, and that's so wrong. But when, in actual fact, my granddaughter said, well, Rishi Sunak's wife didn't pay his taxes. The point of this is really, we can get rid of the Prime Minister at an election, but the king's here to stay. And these conversations are very good to have because they don't think like that, They've lived all the stuff that's been going on, which I have found a bit, not too good. But it's just having the conversations with the younger people and pointing out a few things that they never think about.
Well, that's true. And many of the emotions that we've seen in Britain over the last couple of days are not ignoble ones. They are born of patriotism, and healthy patriotism, a love of one's country, its physical attributes, and above all, its people, and their record of achievement is a good thing. I feel it myself. It's one of the reasons why I fought for Britain to be an independent country, independent of the European Union. It's one of the reasons why I oppose its breakup into tiny constituent parts. I want Britain to be great. I won't say Britain to be great again. For the mass of the people, it's never been great. But Britain is something. It has, to use a Frenchism, je ne sais quoi. It has contributed to the world way out of proportion to its size and the size of its population and its geographic isolation, relatively speaking, from the American continent, from the European mainland, and so on. We have produced many great things, particularly in the cultural field, from Shakespeare to John Lennon and beyond, to Elvis Costello and beyond. And before anyone tells me Elvis is Irish, yeah, his parents were Irish. He was born in England. Of course, if I had more time, I'd list those cultural achievements. I found Robert Burns quotes all over East Germany, all over, on statues, on plaques, in the minds of people. Quotes from the national poet of my small part of Britain, whose words travelled not only across the oceans, but across the ideological divides, and have been kept and engraved on marble and so on. We have made a huge cultural contribution. We have made a huge industrial and manufacturing contribution. Our inventions are legend, many of them too from Scottish people in Britain. And so it is not a bad thing to love your country and love its people and love its good things, its achievements. And many people over the long reign of Queen Elizabeth began to associate the country with the monarch in an obvious and direct way. But that era is over now. The Queen wouldn't have run around with Jimmy Savile. The Queen wouldn't have run around with Klaus Schwab. The Queen wouldn't have adopted one harmful fad after another, from net zero to eating insects. The Queen would not have wished upon her people the future of globalized capitalism that Schwab and his mob have in mind. The Queen wouldn't have done that, but Charles has done it and has no intention, I promise you, of giving it up. Not at all. So that and the brilliance of the British at such great glittering civil occasions as that made a lot of people happy yesterday. And as I said, it was not my wish really to rain on their parade. But I do have a duty to warn everyone that all is not right with King Charles III and his household. And if Jesus had been there yesterday, I believe he would have kicked over the tables outside the Abbey. I believe that all of it was based on state worship of a man unworthy of worship. It was idolatrous. It was against the interests of the people of Britain. And speaking truth in the court of the Sultan or the King is a great privilege to be able to do. I did it in the United States Senate almost exactly 15, 18 years ago, however many it was. I know the anniversary is imminent. And I tried to do it in the British Parliament for nearly 30 years. Nowadays, I do it to a bigger and more educated and intelligent audience, namely you. And I'm very grateful for your presence with me tonight. God willing, I'll be back on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK. Now I've got to go and find out how Manchester United got on. It didn't look great when I looked at the score during one of these breaks. But Celtic won the league. Hail, hail. Thanks very much for being with me. See you on Wednesday, and bring another viewer with you. Why don't you? Have a good night.